if your child only eats 5 things and you've been told that it's just a phase, it's just a control issue, you've honestly been misled. And we're going to talk today about the real things that actually make your child picky and what to do next. So we're going to break down 3 of these things. And number 1, it is in our society today, our grocery stores are so different, right? I was watching a TED Talks on picky eating where they were talking about how our grocery stores are, there are 30,000 choices and our children are barely eating 5 of them. So what is happening to our kids today? And so the first thing I want to offer is that if your child has ever had an exposure to ultra-processed foods where their brain was stimulated with sugar, salt, and fat that was built out by, let's just say, a whole bunch of scientists, and I'm talking in the realm of anything like ice cream, Cheetos, things that are very normal for us to give to children as a reward, and grandparents give it to kids, I want to offer this, that your child's brain was like instantly hijacked. They already now have a standard of expectation for food that is going to be satisfying, not just to their emotional state because they're being rewarded, but also to their survival mechanisms that we all have within our brains. So we all thrive in the idea that sugar, salt, and fat is going to be the thing that helps us survive. So in times of famine, we are hardwired, and we've changed a lot. Like, we have exponentially grown in the last, even 100 years. And we have in some ways become very smart, and food scientists have become very smart at creating the pleasure centers in our brain to hijack our reptilian brain, which is unfortunately has not caught up to the areas and levels of evolution that we are, let's just say, through technology and through food science. So I want to offer that right from the get-go. If your child has ever had an exposure to ultra-processed foods, overcoming picky eating for them is going to look different than, let's just say, using food chaining consistently or offering them a food 12 to 13 times. No, if there's a consistent reintroduction of these ultra-processed foods, then it's going to be even harder. So I'm going to break down the 3 causes. I think it's super helpful for families to understand that we're not in the same zone as we were before, which first off is that most of our children are very nutritionally deficient. And what does that mean? It means that when you're eating ultra-processed foods, not only are you not eating healthy foods, but these are not like medium foods. They're either, like, when we come into the nutrition world, you're either eating something that is healing you or hurting you. And so these are actually so not just toxic, but they're so processed that it actually takes more nutrients that your child has to break them down than anything that could provide. So it's actually considered an anti-nutrient food. So nutrition gaps actually create more, they deplete our taste buds in a way. And so food actually tastes more bitter. So we have data that shows that when we're deficient in zinc and iron, food will naturally taste better. So this throws out the window that saying that says, we need to be just reintroducing food. You can create a psychological safe space for your child, but no matter how many times you keep offering that same food, if it tastes like garbage to them or it's too bitter, they're not going to try it again, and they're going to continue to refuse it. So I want to offer that, especially if they're still having these micro exposures in other places with foods that are very, very stimulating or the brain loves to have, right? Like ice creams and those things. So some of these things now impact our child's developmental milestones. So if we're looking at children who are developmentally delayed, and I'm not just talking about autism, I specifically work with families of children with autism, and we have an entire lifestyle medicine intervention program for this. But it also happens to impact all the children who are just a little behind with learning disabilities, and just a few of the other examples of children who are struggling to just catch up to the basic milestones that is their birthright, to be honest, to be born on this planet. So the next thing to look at is, so that's number 1, is that nutrition gaps will make your child pickier. And so we need to have new avenues. When ultra-processed food came into the picture, we now need to have, and food scientists, we now need to have our own version of things that we need to up-level. We need to change our strategies with overcoming picky eating. Another area that I see is the gut-brain dysfunction. So when we have and we're feeding all of these very like different types of foods that were never meant to hit our gut, to be honest, it creates dysfunction. And so Candida is very high. For example, in autism, there was a study that showed that 80% of children with autism has elevated Candida albicans. And this is a fungus. This is a fungus that is within our bodies that causes a lot of deregulation in behaviors. Constipation, inflammation also cause their own version of behavior. So if you have a child who's toe walking, if you have a child who's always bloated, who's always uncomfortable, who is having meltdowns, these are not things that are just part of your child's condition. No, these are things that are actually directly linked to the foods that they are eating. The third thing that really causes picky eating is toxicity. So basically toxic overload. So we have what we call a bucket. Think of us as a bucket, and we have a limitation to toxins that we can have come into our bodies. And in a world where people don't even sometimes know what a toxin is, think of in 1970, toxicity wasn't something that was really talked about because we didn't have a lot of it. And so we created, from that time until now, we've created over 80,000 chemicals that are now both that. And when we tested, for example, the EWG, which is the Environmental Working Group, tested thousands of umbilical cords, and over 200 chemicals came back positive in each umbilical cord that were really staggering in their findings, because many of these were linked to neurodevelopmental disorders. Many of them were linked to deformities, and many of them were also linked to cancers. So knowing that we have this type of data, this should be a huge wake-up call to everyone that we need to be paying attention to what we are exposing ourselves into the world, not just us, but also our children, who are much more vulnerable to these things. And one of the side products of having all this toxicity overload our systems is that we actually have toxins, histamine, and food intolerances, which will actually increase pickiness. If your child is going to recognize if they have a certain food consistently and that it's making them uncomfortable, and they always have a stomach ache after, they're obviously going to avoid that food, or they're going to start to have more and more refusal. So the reason that bribes and therapy don't work alone is that you can't out therapy a starving brain. We know this. And one of the things that we do want to do at first that is often not talked about and actually is really not addressed at all, people actually tell you to do the opposite of this because it could break your child's trust, is, like I said, if you're going to give your child a repetition of ingredients, we are way past the time where, unless they're just being exposed to healthy versions of these foods, they're going to continue to lean towards processed foods and refuse. And we now know that it is because of the flavor and the changes biologically of their interactions of their saliva with food, creating that bitter taste. So we actually need to address the biology first. And how do we do that? Well, we need to support nutritional deficiencies. Well, how do we do that? So you could see why this becomes a very self-perpetuating cycle. And so how do we overcome the cycle is that we need to work with the foods that they enjoy, and we need to incrementally add foods to those foods within the perimeters of their trust. And so it is, yes, a very tactile way of doing it, but it is no different than food chaining at a microscopic level. And when we food chain at a microscopic level, we know scientifically that our taste buds change usually within a week. So your child's taste buds will adjust as if it was their favorite food when it's at, let's just say, a 10% increase. And when we use the foods that they're enjoying, they have this other flavor of the food that they enjoy, and it makes it feel safer. So two things to learn here. Microscopic is important. So microscopic food chaining is where the magic happens, and that we need to address biology in order for food to not taste bitter. So then we can address the psychology of creating safe environments where food can be fun again. So we have a program called the Bring the Fun Back to Mealtime program that is completely focused on improving picky eating outcomes, sensory eating outcomes, and ARFID outcomes based on these concepts that we now know. So as food companies have gotten smarter, so have we. And so we need to use a lot of different multi-system approaches that are going to help our children really, really get the best out of the nutrition that they're having. And we have to work with what they enjoy. So it's not going to look like, for example, expectation is a huge part. It's not going to look like what you want them to eat. It's going to look like what they eat, but at a much healthier level. I've seen children who eat more vegetables in their mac and cheese that is, yes, potentially dairy-free and gluten-free than, let's just say, an entire person or a child who's eating salads. So we have to just match where they feel the safest while we're still addressing the bitterness of food. That's the first step. And the second step is also bringing the fun back, creating that safe environment. But you can't get to one without first supporting the other. Okay, so now you know everything that I have said in this video that is challenging the current status quo. I see children that are on very, very, food therapy programs. They've been working at it for two plus years. Their children have not tried a new food yet. This is not successful or sustainable. So with that, there is a longer webinar where I explain the entire process of how we overcome picky eating in the Bring the Fun Back to Mealtime program. It is completely free. It is on our page, which you can grab it below. If you found this video valuable, then make sure to like and subscribe. And I cannot wait to share more with you.